These violent delights have violent ends. After days of structural and sporadic violence between Israelis and Palestinians, the respective authorities are now exchanging live fire. Episodes like these are routine, until they're not. Israelis and Palestinians frequently engage in low-level skirmishes, but kinetic combat and intifadas are unusual. There hasn't been a major fight between the two in years, until now. Hamas has launched salvos of rockets against civilian settlements in central and southern Israel, while Israel has targeted office buildings and militant leaders in airstrikes. The violence seems to be flaring. Israel has deployed combat troops along the Gaza border and is preparing for ground operations. Though the tit-for-tat reactions and counter-reactions seem emotionally driven, there is in fact a coldly calculated rationale in the fighting. I'm your host Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. This episode is sponsored by Skillshare, an online learning community that helps develop your skills using online classes. Recently I've taken a class on creative writing by Daniel Jose Older, who is a New York Times best-selling author. The class is only 40 minutes, but it has helped me to get my writing to be on point. If you're interested in doing something similar to Caspian Report, consider this an opportunity to learn more. But if you're in the market for something else, Skillshare offers thousands of topics to choose from, including film and video, productivity, etc. The platform costs less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. That's quite affordable, but to make things even more interesting, the first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership so you can explore your creativity. Hostilities between Palestinians and Israelis are not new and have gone on for decades. The latest episode of violence escalated in mid-April 2021, coinciding with the start of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Israel imposed a limit of 10,000 people gathering for prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which is located in a compound that is referred to as a holy site in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam alike. Restrictions triggered nightly clashes between Israeli law enforcement and Palestinian protesters in the streets of Jerusalem. At the same time, a Jewish settler group turned to the Israeli Supreme Court with claims for land and property in a predominantly Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem. Palestinian families were at risk of eviction. Although both incidents triggered the latest hostilities, Palestinians are frustrated by setbacks to their aspirations for an independent state in recent years, including Washington's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The tipping point, however, occurred on May 8th, during the holiest day of Ramadan, as tens of thousands of Palestinians gathered at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in defiance of the restrictions. Israeli police blocked Palestinians from entering the mosque and then used tear gas and stun grenades inside the holy building. That was a bad call. In retaliation, Hamas fired hundreds of rockets on central and southern Israel. It was like pouring fuel on fire. Understandably, Israel retaliated by carrying out airstrikes in Gaza. The number of civilian casualties mounted in the dozens. Hamas then launched even more rockets, and Israel returned the favor with even more violence. Israelis and Palestinians engage in low-level clashes quite frequently, but at this point there are more questions than answers. Is Hamas running low on munitions? And can they improve the accuracy of their weapons? Can Israel continue to intercept them? Were there any missiles fired from Lebanon or Syria? Or how will the Arab nations respond? With the way things are going, the state of affairs will regress. That much is unavoidable. The question now is, according to what rationale will they regress? From the perspective of Hamas, it is the last organized territorial resistance to Israel. The space they control, the Gaza Strip, sits between Israel and the Mediterranean Sea. It is a place that is densely populated and exceedingly impoverished. Shortage of basic necessities is common, including water, electricity, and medicine. Gaza relies almost entirely on Israel for its supplies. Moreover, there is a sizable Israeli buffer zone within Gaza, which renders much of the land inaccessible. Suffice to say, in all aspects of social life, the Palestinians in Gaza have zero prospects. Resentment and hostility is often considered a medium of escape. Now, what's important to note is that while the militant Hamas governs over the Gaza Strip, the moderate Fatah rules over the West Bank, where East Jerusalem is located. The two groups are rivals. They even fought a conflict that cost the lives of hundreds. Fatah lost the political majority in the 2006 election and then physically lost Gaza to Hamas the year after. However, Fatah retained control over the West Bank, and the two have been at odds since. But as recently as January 2021, Hamas and Fatah had agreed to hold elections at an unspecified date. So when Hamas fired rockets on Israel, it was a political ploy to rank themselves as the legitimate body of the Palestinians, with the aim being to gain control over the West Bank via the upcoming elections. For its part, the government of Israel also has elections in mind. Prime Minister Netanyahu is in a political pickle. He has been unable to form a coalition government, and the deadline will expire within a month. If he is unable to form a coalition, Israel will see its fifth general election since 2019. This time, however, after 12 years of power, it could cost Netanyahu his office. So the senior partner of the Israeli government has an interest in galvanizing the public through political rhetoric and kinetic exchange. Beyond elections, and in spite of the high-running emotions, Hamas and Israel have different but rational objectives. Hamas wants to replace Fatah and negotiate directly with Israel. To do so, Hamas needs to make a lot of noise. It doesn't have a conventional military to engage Israeli troops, but it does have facilities to store short-range rockets capable of striking around the vicinity of Gaza. Hamas also has some medium-range missiles that are capable of reaching Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, but their stockpile is low in number. Now, the know-how to produce these weapons was provided by Iran. As the Arab nations abandoned the Palestinian cause in recent years, the Iranians have stepped up to fill the void. Iran also controls large sums of missiles and rockets in Syria and Lebanon, both of which form the Iranian arc of influence into the Mediterranean. Israel has been engaging the Iranian proxy groups in Syria for a while, but it has not entered the Lebanese arena. The capabilities of the Lebanese Hezbollah are deemed too costly to engage. This is not to say that Hamas is a proxy of Iran, it certainly is not, but the developments that are taking place across the Israeli landscape are part of the proxy conflict with Iran. The know-how to produce missiles and rockets has changed the playing field in Gaza. Today, Israel's objectives in Gaza are twofold. It needs to prevent a prolonged missile campaign into the Israeli coastal plain, which runs along the Mediterranean coast into the Judean mountains, anchoring by the cities of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa. This triangle-like space is the epicenter of Israel's political, economic, and cultural life. Hostile raids cannot be tolerated here. It strikes at the heart of Israel. The high-tech air defense systems that Israel employs were specifically designed to defend this space. But the tools of war cannot sustain against a prolonged missile campaign. So in addition to having top-notch weapons, some sort of strategic policy is necessary. The Israeli answer to this is disproportionate military actions, which is ultimately meant as a deterrent to fend off attacks in its heartland. However, the threat to Israel's heartland comes not only from the air, but also from guerrilla attacks on the ground. This then explains why Israel repeatedly attacks Hamas's positions as a means to disrupt its military capabilities. Hamas, meanwhile, must find ways to survive. It needs to lift the Israeli and Egyptian blockade, meaning some sort of accommodation with Israel is necessary. And the only way to get the Israelis to the negotiating table is by posing a significant danger and imposing an agreement of sorts. Hence, the missiles in Gaza. Now, that said, while the missiles certainly give Hamas leverage, it also creates a conundrum for Gaza. The Israelis do not want to talk to Hamas. Compromise with Hamas by granting Gaza an autonomous status would encourage it to acquire and produce even more missiles, thus bringing the Israeli heartland under fundamental risk. In fact, the Israelis would rather prefer to outright occupy Gaza and disperse its citizens, which is now being considered by the Israeli leadership. It is up to the Israelis to decide whether the physical occupation of Gaza is worth the bad press. However, even with Israel's military might, moving into Gaza is a military challenge. Gaza is small, but it's a densely packed urban environment. Hostile forces familiar with the area can move about swiftly. Hiding, engaging, withdrawing, and deploying would be relatively easy for Hamas. Plus, it is believed that Hamas possesses sophisticated anti-tank weapons, putting Israeli armor and infantry at risk. All the while, Hamas may launch a prolonged missile campaign at Israeli cities. Israel would still win the fight, but the cost would be high. Urban warfare would result in casualties that the Israelis cannot afford, which may then spell the political end of the ruling government. The Israeli leadership is now threatening to destroy the hierarchy of Hamas and the reality of Gaza. To do so would require occupation. Both sides have already crossed each other's red lines, and as the conflict evolves, there are two things to watch for: Hamas's missiles targeting the Israeli heartland and the Israeli army mobilizing into Gaza. Even if the political leadership of Hamas and Israel had a change of heart, public frustration on both sides makes it difficult for the political leaders to appease their angry constituents and de-escalate the situation. There are so many triggers to unrest that more violence is inevitable. By and large, though, violence spawns violence, but it also creates opportunities to do things differently, regardless of whether that means some peaceful resolution or decisive military action. One can never let a good crisis go to waste. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you approve of our work, please leave a like, comment and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and Sarol.